Cowboy found Apache crying at dusk, and the carved symbol Apache carried altered his destiny. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Jake Thompson had lived a solitary life for years. A cowboy through and through, Jake had chosen the quiet, lonely life of the plains after a difficult past he preferred not to speak about. His days were spent on horseback, herding cattle across the wide open lands of the West, and his nights were spent alone under the stars. The wind, the dust, and the distant horizon were his only companions, and he liked it that way. He wasn't someone who sought company or excitement, preferring the peace that came with solitude. But that all changed one evening as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the world in golden light. Jake had been riding along the edge of the river, his mind drifting, when he noticed something out of place. A figure, small and fragile, sitting on a large rock near the water's edge. The figure was a young woman, her face streaked with tears, her eyes distant and empty. Her dark hair fell around her face, and her body shook with quiet sobs. Jake felt something stir in him. It wasn't his nature to intervene, but something about her presence, something about the sorrow she carried, tugged at his heart. As he rode closer, the woman didn't even glance up. She seemed lost, caught in her own world of pain, as if she didn't even notice the world around her. Jake dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He approached her cautiously, unsure of what to do. "Miss?" he called gently, his voice low and careful. The woman's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear, but they softened when she saw him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to intrude." Jake took a step forward, offering a reassuring smile. "You're not intruding," he said kindly. "Are you all right?" The woman's lips trembled, and for a moment she didn't speak. But then she nodded, though her eyes betrayed the truth. She was far from all right. She wiped her tears away with the back of her hand, but it did little to erase the sadness in her expression. I don't know what to do," she whispered, barely audible over the gentle rush of the river. Jake knelt beside her, not knowing what compelled him to stay, but feeling a pull he couldn't ignore. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said softly. "But you don't have to be alone either." For a long moment, the two of them sat in silence, the only sounds being the river's quiet flow and the rustling of the wind through the trees. Jake couldn't help but notice the symbol she wore around her neck, a small, carved pendant hanging from a leather cord. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before, intricate and full of meaning. The woman's hand instinctively went to the pendant, her fingers brushing over the worn surface. "This is a symbol of my people," she said, her voice still soft but stronger now. "It's passed down from my ancestors. It's supposed to protect me." Jake looked at her closely, taking in the faint markings on her face, the way her clothes spoke of a life hard lived, and the quiet strength she held in her eyes. "I'm Jake," he said, offering his hand. She hesitated for a moment before taking it. "Ayanna," she replied. "Ayanna Blackfeather." The name struck something deep within Jake, though he couldn't place why. There was a weight to it, a history that seemed to transcend the moment. As they stood there, the last light of the day fading away, Jake felt the strange stirrings of something larger than either of them, as if the moment was leading them somewhere either could have predicted. Little did Jake know that the symbol Ayanna carried, that small, carved pendant, would alter his life forever, drawing him into a world he had never imagined, one filled with challenges, choices, and a destiny that would unfold in ways he could never have foreseen. As Jake and Ayanna made their way back toward the small cabin he called home, the silence between them was comforting, filled with an unspoken understanding. The night air grew colder, and the stars above twinkled brightly in the vast, open sky. Jake led the way, his hand resting on the reins of his horse, while Ayana followed closely behind, her movements steady but cautious. She had told him little about her past, only that she was from a distant tribe, but something in her eyes made Jake realize that she carried the weight of many untold stories. They reached the cabin after a long, quiet walk, the flickering light of a fire casting warm shadows on the wooden walls. Jake opened the door and motioned for Ayana to come inside. She hesitated for a moment before stepping over the threshold, her eyes scanning the simple room. It was small but comfortable, with a rough-hewn table in the center and a stone fireplace along one wall. The scent of dried herbs and wood smoke filled the air, grounding Ayana in the present moment. "Make yourself at home," Jake said, closing the door behind them. "You must be tired." Ayana nodded, but her gaze kept returning to the carved pendant around her neck. It seemed to hold a quiet power, as if it were more than just a piece of jewelry. She could feel its weight, both literal and metaphorical, as it hung heavily against her chest. As she sat by the fire, the flames dancing in front of her, Jake couldn't help but feel the strange pull of fate, the sense that something larger than both of them was at work. "Why are you here?" Jake asked after a long pause, his voice low but sincere. "What happened to you?" Ayana looked into the fire, her fingers brushing the pendant once more. "I came here seeking refuge," she said quietly. "My people, we've been pushed farther and farther from our land, our homes, and now we are scattered. I thought I could find peace, but—" Her voice trailed off, as if she didn't quite know how to finish the thought. Jake sat down opposite her, his eyes softening with empathy. "You're safe here," he said simply, though he knew that safety meant something different for her. Ayana met his gaze, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of something he hadn't noticed before: trust. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was a moment of silence between them, and then Ayana stood up, moving to the window. Outside, the world was dark and still, the quiet broken only by the sound of wind rustling through the trees. It was in that moment that Jake noticed the full significance of the pendant she wore. It wasn't just a symbol of her people, it was a link to something greater. Something that, he sensed, had the power to change both of their lives. He didn't know it yet, but the symbol she carried would lead him down a path he never expected, one filled with challenges, secrets, and a bond between them that neither could ignore. Ayana turned back to face him, her eyes locking with his. "The symbol you see," she began slowly. "It's a mark of our ancestors. It carries the strength of our people, and now it is yours if you choose to accept it." Jake looked at her, confusion and curiosity in his expression. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ayana took a deep breath, her eyes steady as she met his gaze. "It is not just a token," she said, her voice full of quiet authority. "It has the power to change destiny. It will show you the way when you are lost, give you strength when you feel weak, and guide you when you cannot see the path." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had always believed that fate was something left to chance, something unspoken. But now, sitting here with Ayana, the weight of her words seemed to hang in the air, impossible to ignore. He didn't understand what it all meant yet, but something deep inside him told him that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. As the fire crackled, Jake realized that the life he had known, the quiet solitude of the plains, was about to change. And with that change, so too would his future. He couldn't explain it, but he knew one thing for sure: Ayana's presence, the symbol she carried, and the connection that had been formed between them were leading him somewhere important. Somewhere he had never expected to go. And he would follow, whether he was ready or not. Ayana sat by the fire, the flames flickering in her eyes, casting shadows across her face. Jake had left her alone to think, giving her time to process everything that had transpired. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him as he stood outside, looking at the vast, dark sky stretching endlessly above them. The air was crisp, and the night had settled in, but the world around him felt alive with possibilities. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, that his life was about to take a turn he hadn't anticipated. He thought about Ayana, the mysterious symbol she carried, and the promise of something more. She had said that the symbol would guide him when he was lost. He wasn't sure what that meant, but something deep inside him told him that he had already begun this journey without even knowing where it would lead. A soft rustling behind him pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Ayana standing in the doorway of the cabin, her eyes reflecting the firelight. She had a quiet strength about her, something that spoke of resilience and survival, but also a sense of peace that he hadn't seen in her before. She stepped out into the cool night air and walked over to him. "Jake," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper against the stillness of the night. He turned to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something new in her eyes, a spark of trust. "You know, this symbol, it's more than just a piece of jewelry. It carries the weight of my people's history," she said, her fingers lightly tracing the pendant around her neck. "It's a reminder of everything we've lost, and everything we're fighting to protect. It's not just for us. It's for the future." Jake listened intently, the weight of her words settling deep in his chest. He couldn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew there was truth in what she said. "I don't know if I'm ready for any of this," he admitted, his voice low. "But I can feel it, Ayana. Something's changing." She nodded, her gaze steady. "You don't have to be ready. None of us ever are. We're just here, doing what we can." A silence stretched between them, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with understanding. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky. Jake looked at Ayana, her expression calm, yet there was something in the way she held herself that spoke of a deep inner strength. He had never met anyone quite like her. "You said this symbol would guide me," he said slowly. "How? What am I supposed to do with it?" Ayana's gaze softened. "You don't need to have all the answers, Jake. You just have to listen. To the world. To the people around you. To your heart. The symbol will show you the way when you need it the most." Her words lingered in the air, like a promise, but also a challenge. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settling into his soul. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure: this journey had already begun, and there was no turning back. As they stood there together, the firelight flickering in the distance, Jake realized that he wasn't just helping Ayana. He was helping himself. There was a part of him that had been lost for a long time, a part that had been buried under years of solitude and pain. But in this moment he felt it stir, like a spark of hope, small but powerful. Ayana stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. "We're in this together," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Jake nodded, his heart beating a little faster. He didn't know what the future held, but with Ayana by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Yana woke early the next morning, the soft light of dawn breaking through the small cabin's window. The fire from last night had long since died down, and the air was crisp with the first signs of autumn. She stood quietly for a moment, listening to the stillness of the world around her. The sound of birds calling in the distance was the only sign of life. She had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of what had happened and what was yet to come. She had spent years running from her past, from the pain of losing her people, but now, in this strange new place, with Jake, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was where her journey would finally take a turn for the better. She glanced over at Jake, who was still sleeping soundly in his chair by the fire. She had noticed the change in him over the past few days, something shifting beneath the surface. He had always been quiet, reserved, but now he seemed to be opening up, allowing himself to feel again. It was a side of him that she hadn't seen before, and it made her heart ache with a mix of hope and fear. She didn't want to admit it, but a part of her had begun to care for him. Not just because he had helped her, but because she saw something in him, something raw, something that matched the brokenness she had carried for so long. She shook the thought away and stepped outside. The cool morning air filled her lungs as she walked toward the river. The water was still, almost unnaturally so, and she knelt beside it, watching the surface shimmer as the light caught the ripples. Her hand hovered over the water, her fingers brushing the surface lightly. The symbol she carried around her neck felt heavier this morning, as if it were calling to her. She didn't know what it meant, not fully, but she knew it had always been with her, through every hardship, every loss. It was part of her heritage, and now, it seemed to be pulling her in a direction she couldn't yet understand. She sat on the river bank for a while, lost in her thoughts, before standing up and walking back toward the cabin. As she approached, she saw Jake stirring, his eyes opening slowly, as if the weight of the world had just started to settle on him. He looked at her, and for a moment either of them spoke. "You were up early," Jake said, his voice rough with sleep. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, offering a small smile. "Too much on my mind." He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I get that. I've been thinking a lot too. About what you said yesterday. About this symbol, this destiny thing." Yana looked at him, her expression softening. "I didn't mean to confuse you," she said quietly. "But I truly believe that symbol means something. It's been passed down through generations, a reminder of who we are and where we come from. It's not just a piece of jewelry." Jake sat up straighter, his hands resting on his knees. "I can't say I fully understand all of it yet. But I feel like it's leading us somewhere." Yana nodded. "It is. You're not the only one it's calling to." Jake stood up and walked toward her, his footsteps slow but purposeful. "So, what do we do now?" he asked, his voice steady. "We keep moving forward," Yana said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "One step at a time." They stood there for a long moment, the weight of the journey ahead of them settling into the space between them. Neither of them knew what the future held, but in that moment, with the river flowing beside them and the world stretching out before them, they both knew one thing for certain: they were no longer alone. The journey ahead would be difficult, but together, they had the strength to face whatever came next. Yana and Jake continued their journey, the days blending together as they traveled through the rugged landscape of the West. The sun rose and set, marking time in a way that felt both comforting and relentless. They had no destination in mind, but the open road felt like the only place they could truly find answers. They moved through the vast plains, across dry riverbeds, and into the shadow of distant mountains, always together, always with the quiet understanding that something greater was drawing them forward. One morning, as the mist lifted off the land, Jake found himself staring at the horizon. There was a weight in the air, a feeling that something was about to shift. He turned to Ayana, who was riding beside him, her expression distant, lost in thought. "What do you think it all means?" he asked, his voice soft. Ayana looked at him, her eyes steady, but there was a flicker of something more beneath the surface. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice carrying a quiet uncertainty. "But I think we're getting closer. The symbol is more than just a guide. It's a message." Jake nodded slowly, his hand resting on the reins of his horse. The wind tousled his hair, and for a moment he felt the vastness of the world around him, both humbling and empowering. "I feel like we're on the edge of something. Like this is the beginning of something bigger." Ayana turned her gaze toward him, her eyes reflecting the weight of his words. "Maybe it's not just about us," she said quietly. "Maybe it's about everyone. My people, your people, everyone. The symbol is a reminder that we're all connected." Jake's brow furrowed as he processed her words. "Connected how?" "I think it's about balance," Ayana replied, her voice thoughtful. "For too long, there's been a divide. A misunderstanding. But we all share this land, this world. And maybe the symbol is showing us that we need to come together, to understand each other." The idea settled into Jake's mind, stirring something deep within him. He had never thought about things that way. He had always lived with a sense of separation, a feeling that he was alone in the world, but now, hearing Ayana speak, something in him began to shift. They traveled on, the days stretching out before them, until one evening, they came across a small settlement. It was a cluster of weathered buildings, the kind of place where people kept to themselves, their lives as rugged as the land that surrounded them. Jake and Ayana rode into the settlement quietly, not wanting to draw attention. But as they passed through, they couldn't help but notice the wary looks from the few people they saw. It wasn't long before they were approached by a man, his face lined with age and hard living. He looked at Ayanna with a mixture of curiosity and caution, but it was Jake who caught his eye first. "You two passing through?" the man asked, his voice gruff. Jake nodded, but Ayanna spoke before he could respond. "We're not here to cause trouble. Just passing through." The man looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on the symbol around her neck. "That's a strange thing you're wearing," he said, his tone changing. "I've seen something like it before." Ayanna's hand instinctively went to the pendant, her fingers tracing the familiar carving. "It's part of my heritage," she said softly. "Something passed down through my people." The man's expression softened slightly, but there was still a hint of distrust in his eyes. "I don't know much about your people, but I know trouble when I see it. You should keep moving." Ayanna nodded, not wanting to cause any more tension. She turned to Jake, and they both began to move their horses toward the outskirts of the settlement. But as they were about to leave, the man called out, "Wait." Jake turned back, raising an eyebrow. "What is it?" The man looked around, as if making sure. No one was listening, before lowering his voice. "There's talk," he said, his eyes flicking nervously toward the distance. "Talk of something coming. Something big. You two might want to know about it." Jake's heart began to race. "What kind of talk?" The man hesitated, then glanced toward the mountains in the distance. "I don't know the details. But it's something involving the tribes. And people from outside the land. I've heard whispers. The symbol you carry, it's not just a family heirloom. It's part of something bigger, something that could change everything." Ayanna's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" The man shook his head, his voice low. "I don't have all the answers. But I know one thing, if you're going to be part of whatever's coming, you'll need to be ready." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the settlement. Jake and Ayanna stood there for a moment, taking in the man's words. The air felt charged, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. The uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on them both, but in that moment, they knew that they couldn't turn back. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Ayanna and Jake spent the next few days traveling through the vast, open land, the weight of the stranger's warning hanging over them like a storm on the horizon. The path ahead felt uncertain, but the air between them was filled with a quiet sense of purpose. Each day seemed to stretch out before them, like an uncharted road, waiting for them to make the first move. They traveled deeper into the wilderness, moving along the fringes of the forest where the trees grew thick and the wind howled through the branches. It was a place where the land held onto its secrets, and the world seemed to move in slow, deliberate rhythms. It was here, in the silence of nature, that Jake felt the weight of their journey press against him the hardest. He had always been a man of action, someone who knew what needed to be done and how to get it done. But now, with Ayanna by his side and the mysterious symbol she carried hanging between them, he felt something new stirring within him, something that made him question everything he thought he knew. Ayanna had been quiet for most of the journey, her eyes often distant, lost in thoughts Jake couldn't begin to understand. He didn't push her to speak. He knew better than to force words out of someone who wasn't ready to share. But as they rode along one evening, the sun casting a golden hue over the landscape, Ayanna spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Jake," she said, her gaze focused on the horizon. "There's something I haven't told you." Jake turned his head toward her, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" he asked, his voice calm but filled with concern. Ayanna took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the pendant at her neck, as if seeking strength from it. "The symbol I carry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just a reminder of my people. It's a key. A key to something far bigger than either of us." Jake's heart skipped a beat as he processed her words. "A key to what?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. Ayanna met his gaze, her eyes filled with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "To the land itself. To the heart of the world. The symbol carries the power to awaken something ancient, something that's been dormant for centuries. Jake shook his head slightly, trying to make sense of what she was saying. You mean like magic? Ayana smiled faintly, her gaze softening. Not magic. Something older. The kind of power that doesn't belong to any one person, but to all of us. Jake was silent for a moment, his mind racing. He had never believed in anything like that before. But standing there, with Ayana beside him and the weight of the symbol in the air between them, he felt a stirring of something he couldn't quite explain. And you think that's what this is all about? He asked, his voice low. Ayana nodded slowly. I think it's what we're meant to find. But we can't do it alone. It's not just about me or you. It's about everyone. My people. Your people. All of us, coming together to restore balance. Jake thought about her words, the weight of them settling on his shoulders. For the first time since they had set out, he understood. It wasn't just about the symbol. It wasn't just about the journey they were on. It was about something much bigger than either of them, a chance to restore balance. To the world, to heal the wounds of the past, and to bring people together in a way they never had before. The realization hit him like a wave, filling him with a sense of purpose he hadn't known he was capable of. Ayana was right. This wasn't just a journey. It was a mission. A chance to change the course of history. As the night drew on and the stars began to emerge above them, Jake and Ayana rode together, their hearts heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. They didn't know how they would do it, or even what it would take. But they knew one thing for certain, they were in this together. And with that knowledge they pressed on, toward whatever future awaited them. Yana and Jake rode on through the days that followed, each step taking them deeper into the heart of a world they were only beginning to understand. The landscape around them was as vast and open as their future felt, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It wasn't the quiet stillness of solitude anymore. It was something more alive, more filled with possibility. They traveled through forests where the trees whispered with the wind and across fields where the grass waved like a welcoming hand. Jake couldn't help but feel that the world was watching them, guiding them forward in ways he couldn't yet explain. The days were long, filled with hard rides and long silences, but they also shared moments of quiet understanding. Ayana had become more open as they traveled together, her presence at once calming and intense. There were moments when she would glance at him, her eyes distant, lost in thought, but when she spoke, it was always with a purpose. Jake, she said one evening as they camped under the stars, the firelight flickering between them. Do you ever wonder how things got this way? How everything is so broken? Jake looked at her, his gaze steady. I don't know, he replied, his voice soft. I guess I always thought things were just the way they were. You know, like they couldn't be any different. But now, with all of this, he gestured to the land around them, the endless sky above them. It's like I'm starting to see that maybe we're the ones who can change it. Ayana studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his face as if she were seeing something new. Maybe that's what the symbol is for, she said quietly, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the pendant around her neck. Maybe it's not just about me. Maybe it's about all of us, coming together, finding a way to heal the land and each other. Jake nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had never thought about it that way before. He had always seen his life as a series of small, disconnected moments, never really understanding how they all fit together. But now, with Ayana by his side, the pieces were starting to fall into place. So, what do we do now? He asked, his voice filled with quiet determination. We keep going, Ayana replied, her eyes meeting his. We keep moving forward. And when the time comes, we'll know what to do. The next few days passed in much the same way, long rides, quiet conversations, and the ever-present feeling that something was just out of reach. But as they rode into a small town one afternoon, something changed. It was a place that seemed to exist on the edges of the world, where people went to escape and never looked back. The buildings were old, weathered by time, and the streets were lined with the kind of dust that seemed to settle in your bones. As they entered the town, Jake noticed the way the people watched them, curious, cautious, as if they didn't quite belong. They made their way to a small inn, and Jake helped Iana dismount, his eyes scanning the street for any signs of trouble. "We should be careful here," he muttered under his breath. "Something feels off." Iana looked around, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "I sense it too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we have no choice but to stay for the night." The inn was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around the room. As Jake and Iana made their way to a table, they were met with a silent greeting from the innkeeper, a man with tired eyes and a weathered face. "You two seem like you've been on the road for a while," he said, his voice low but kind. "What brings you to this part of the country?" Jake hesitated, glancing at Iana before speaking. "Just passing through," he said, keeping his voice neutral. The innkeeper nodded, though his eyes lingered on Iana for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Well, be careful out there," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "Things aren't as peaceful as they used to be. There's been talk of trouble on the horizon. Not just from the settlers, but from the tribes as well. Something's coming, and it's not good." Jake exchanged a look with Iana, a silent understanding passing between them. "We've heard the rumors," Iana said, her voice calm but steady. "We'll be careful." The innkeeper gave them a long look before nodding slowly. "Good. It's best to stay out of trouble in times like these. Trust me." The rest of the evening passed quietly, but as Jake lay awake that night, staring up at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something much larger than they had ever anticipated. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that whatever came next, it was going to change everything. The world was shifting, and they were at the center of it. Together, they would face whatever was to come. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Iana woke early the next morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the quiet town. The sound of birds singing filled the air, but it wasn't enough to drown out the weight of the conversation they'd had the night before. Jake had stayed up late, his mind wrestling with the innkeeper's warnings and the strange feeling in his chest. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but the sense of impending change lingered in the back of his mind. As the day stretched out before them, they packed up their few belongings and saddled their horses. There was no clear destination, no plan beyond moving forward. But the uncertainty no longer felt as daunting. Now, it felt like part of the journey itself. "We should head toward the mountains," Iana said quietly as she adjusted her gear. Jake looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "Why the mountains?" he asked. Iana's eyes were steady, her gaze locked onto the distant peaks. "It's where the symbol is meant to lead us," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "There are things hidden in those mountains, things that can help us understand everything. The land is speaking to us. We just have to listen." Jake nodded, though a part of him was still unsure of what he was hearing. But as he looked at Iana, he saw the conviction in her eyes. He knew better than to doubt her now. Together, they rode toward the mountains, the path growing steeper as they ascended into the rocky terrain. The air grew thinner, cooler, and the sounds of the world seemed to fade away, replaced by the rhythmic clip-clop of their horses' hooves against the earth. The journey was long and grueling, but neither of them complained. It was a silent understanding between them that they were exactly where they needed to be. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip lower in the sky. They had reached a narrow pass between two jagged cliffs when Iana suddenly stopped her horse, her hand raised to signal Jake. He pulled his horse to a halt beside her. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Iana's gaze was fixed on something in the distance. "Do you feel that?" she asked softly. Jake looked around, but saw nothing unusual. The air was still, and the mountains stood silent, their towering peaks casting long shadows as the sun set. "Feel what?" he asked. Iana's voice dropped to a whisper. "There's something here. Something waiting for us." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure if it was the cold air or something else, but the sense of something unseen watching them made his heart race. Iana dismounted from her horse and walked toward the cliffs, her steps steady, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Jake followed, unsure of what he was about to witness but trusting Ayana's instincts. As they reached the base of the cliff, Ayana stopped, her eyes scanning the rocky surface. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the stone, and Jake watched as her face softened with recognition. "It's here," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. Jake took a step closer, his gaze following hers. The rock before them wasn't just a plain cliffside, it was covered in ancient markings, symbols carved deep into the stone. Some of them seemed familiar, like the one on Ayana's pendant. She reached out, her fingers tracing one of the symbols, and Jake could see the way her face changed as if she were unlocking a memory. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the key." Jake stared at the markings, a sense of wonder and confusion filling him. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Ayana turned to face him, her expression serene. "Now we wait." Jake looked at her, unsure of what she meant, but something in her eyes told him that she knew exactly what was coming next. And so they stood there, in the quiet of the mountains, waiting for whatever the land had in store for them. As the night fell, the temperature dropped, and the stars above them began to shine brighter. The only sound was the wind, whispering through the rocks. In that moment, it felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. Jake couldn't explain it, but he knew that everything was about to change. They were no longer just travelers on a journey, they were part of something much bigger, something ancient, something that had been waiting for them. And in that moment, Jake understood. The symbol, the land, and Ayana, it was all connected. They were meant to be here, to uncover the truth that had been buried in the mountains for centuries. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Yana stood in front of the cliff, her fingers still tracing the ancient symbols carved into the stone. The markings seemed to pulse beneath her touch, as though they were alive, responding to her presence. Jake watched in silence, his heart racing as the weight of the moment settled over him. He had always felt like an observer in his own life, but now, standing here with Ayana, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. Something ancient and powerful. The wind began to pick up, swirling around them as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. The sky turned dark, and the stars began to emerge, shining brightly in the vast expanse above. The silence between them grew heavy, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then, Ayana pulled her hand away from the stone and turned to face Jake. "It's time," she said, her voice calm but filled with determination. Jake looked at her, his mind racing. "Time for what?" he asked, though. He had a feeling he already knew the answer. Ayana's gaze was steady as she met his eyes. "The land is calling us. The symbol is the key, but it's not just for us. It's for everyone." Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. The weight of her words was like a heavy burden, but there was also something in them that stirred a sense of purpose deep within him. "We can't do this alone," Ayana continued. "We have to find the others. The ones who will help us." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What others?" he asked, confusion and curiosity swirling inside him. Ayana looked toward the horizon, her eyes narrowing as if she were seeing something far beyond the reach of ordinary vision. "There are others who carry the same symbol," she said quietly. "Others who have been waiting for this moment. We need to find them, Jake. They will help us unlock the power of the land." Jake absorbed her words, feeling a strange sense of urgency rising in him. He had never considered the possibility of there being others like Ayana, others who were tied to the same fate, but now it made sense. The world felt larger than it ever had before, and he knew that they were not alone in this. "How do we find them?" he asked, his voice steady with the resolve that had begun to settle over him. Ayana turned to him, her eyes full of quiet strength. "We follow the land," she said simply. "The land will guide us." With that, she mounted her horse, and Jake followed suit. Together, they set off into the night, the path before them unknown but filled with the promise of discovery. The world around them seemed to hold its breath as they rode through the darkness, the wind whispering through the trees and the stars shining brightly above them. The journey was far from over, but Jake could feel the shift in the air, the sense that they were heading towards something powerful. As the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, Jake found himself thinking of everything that had led them to this point. The endless days on the road, the strange symbol, the quiet moments shared with Ayanna. He realized that everything had been building to this, that their journey was part of something larger than either of them could have anticipated. They were on the brink of something monumental, something that would change everything. And though the future remained uncertain, Jake knew that he and Ayanna would face it together. The night stretched on, and with each passing hour, the land seemed to grow more alive, as if it were watching them, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. They rode through the darkness, the sound of their horses' hooves the only thing breaking the silence. In the distance, Jake saw the faint outline of a mountain range, its peaks silhouetted against the starry sky. It was a sign, he realized. They were getting closer. Ayanna, too, seemed to sense it. She turned to Jake, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the moonlight. "We're almost there," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. Jake nodded, his heart beating faster as he urged his horse forward. The land was calling them, and they were ready to answer. They didn't know what lay ahead, but together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. As the mountains grew larger on the horizon, they both knew that the real journey was just beginning.